Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to take a look at the autofocus performance of the new Tamron 100-400mm, and this is an f4.5 to 5.6. It is a VC USD lens. Now, earlier this year when I did a review of the Sigma 100-400 contemporary lens, I was really impressed with the actual image quality from a lens that, cost a fraction of like the Canon 100-400L Mark II lens that I typically use for this kind of work. And the Canon often cost in excess of $2,000. Sigma came out with this lens at $799. And after I did my image quality comparison, people were were blown away, as I was, with the resolution and the image quality from the lens, and really, getting ready to sell their Canon gear. And I said, well, just wait. And because I knew, having already started to shoot the test, that it wasn't really ready to keep up with the action that a lot of people will want to shoot with a focal length like this. Everything from some outdoor sporting events and maybe even indoor under decent light, but also things like, bird in flight or wildlife. And so I just didn't feel like it really had the autofocus speed to keep up with a lot of those situations, at least in my test. And so when I did my image quality review here of the Tamron, which you definitely want to take a look at that if you haven't already, I noted once again that the image quality is exceptional. And, while there is some very minor give and take with the Canon, it basically is pretty much as good. The Canon has a little bit better wide open contrast, and I find it definitely has a little bit more better light transmission, but at the same time it's also guilty of some pretty serious focus breathing, and the Tamron is not. And so, there's kind of strengths on both sides. But what I really wanted to determine is if the Tamron could do a better job in keeping up with action. And so what we're doing today is we're going to take a look at autofocus in general. One of Tamron's stated priorities is that, now that they have the tap-in console, and I've been noting in Tamron reviews that the tap-in console is great, but you have to invest a lot of time to kind of get the best out of lenses. And so in kind of private conversations with some Tamron people, one of the things that they've expressed to me is that Tamron's goal is to give a better autofocus out-of-the-box experience. So I was interested to see if this lens was capable of doing that. And so we're going to take a look at some stills focus even before calibration. And then we'll also take a look at its ability to track and keep up with action. Let's jump in. Let's look at some photos. I did something that I don't really recommend doing, and I took it and I shot at an event at my children's school without having calibrated it at all. But as you can see from a distance of about 35 feet away, this is 400 millimeters, you can see that obviously we're shooting at higher ISO here, but the focus is pretty much flawless here. And even despite the high ISO, wide open, it's actually resolving really, really well. So right out of the box, this lens focused well. Also in a crowd here, my son, he's about 45, 50 feet away across a gym here. But you can see that autofocus really just nailed in there. You can actually read, faintly Ray-Ban there on the side of his glasses. So, I mean, that's pretty impressive at that kind of distance. Also, here's another shot. All of these are, phase detect, viewfinder autofocused here. And you can see that at a close to, medium distance focus is just nailed. I mean, shallow depth of field here, but this is where I wanted to focus on, and you can see it's both focused and resolved really well. Here, I wanted to shoot kind of a subject that was a little bit more challenging against a very blown out bright sky, and this also shows off the low chromatic aberration, but you can see that it's grabbed focus despite the challenging focus conditions. Now this particular shot is at a very high ISO. It's 3200 here, and so the light was low, and let's see, the shutter speed was only 1/160th, and so you can see that despite the higher kind of low light conditions, that we have grabbed on autofocus as we should. And I can't remember, I was probably shooting for an eye, but it may have been you know, big enough that it caught the nose there instead. But obviously it's done a good job. Now I shared this one for the reason that, you know, number one, it is accurately autofocused, but this is the one occasion where I remember getting a little bit of pulsing in the field. This was a backlit subject. The sun was shining through more brightly than what you can tell here. And obviously it's quite slender blades here to latch onto. So I did get a quick bit of pulsing back and forth. However, it did lock focus accurately. And that really was about the only situation I saw that. Now this was switching to a Canon 80D. Previously we've been looking at a Canon 5D Mark IV, and so I wanted to see if it would focus, you know, accurately out of the box on more than one body. And so here we can see that this quick shot, you know, shot through branches. My wife couldn't even see what I was shooting at first. We were out on a walk, but you can see how that it's avoided the distractions. It is focused in nicely, and you know, if it's not perfectly pin sharp, I don't see that it's either focused front or back, and so I think it's focused accurately there, and so that was great. This, I just wanted to show kind of a comparison to where I shot this. This is again Canon 80D, just these fungi growing on the side of a trunk of a tree here. And so I shot it phase detect, and then I switched to live view and shot again. And frankly, you know, you can tell looking at it that the focus on one is really no better than the other. And so it's focused accurately for me with the phase detect, again, on two different camera bodies. So that's positive. Switching back for one other shot here to 5D Mark IV. This is pretty near minimum focus distance, and so I just wanted to show you that it's focused accurately here. Obviously depth of field is really shallow here, but even at minimum focus distance, it has focused well. Now, before we transition into a tracking series, just to show shooting some action here, and you can see that you know, it's locked focus quickly here. My shutter speed probably could have been a hair higher to freeze the action just a bit more, but you can see that the actual autofocus here is just nailed down, and so has done a great job. Okay, in this test, we're going to look at a series of images that show how the new Tamron 100-400 VC does in tracking. Now, this is a bit of a torture test. It's a small dog moving towards the camera and, you know, moving very, very fast, chasing a ball. And so my experience in doing this kind of test for years now with a variety of lenses says that this, you know, pretty much puts the lens to the test. And so as we can see here, you know, in this particular sequence, the lens is doing a good job of keeping up with the action. Obviously, the dog's moving very fast here, but we can see that, you know, there we have a bit of a missed focus, but we also see that the dog is shifting direction, and it looks to me like maybe the ball is the point of focus there as the action shifts, and then as the dog turns and cuts chasing the ball, that the focus has picked back up once again. Now, this particular series, this is one of the early ones that I shot. At first I thought, oh, this is a throwaway first few images, because the dog, who is what I was expecting to be in focus, was obviously not out of focus. But then I noticed that the plane of focus kept moving forward, and I clued into the fact that actually it's the ball that was being tracked by the autofocus here, and that actually was even more impressive to me, that such a small object, and it's not to say that each one of these are perfectly focused, don't get me wrong here, but we can see that the plane of focus is moving very rapidly ahead, chasing after the ball. And in fact, you know, here once again, let's just give that a second for textures to load. You know, again, it's not perfectly focused, but at the same time, the tracking is moving forward at the appropriate speed. And so it's not until the dog actually catches up to the ball that, you know, that actually begins to come in focus. So, you know, that it was encouraging to that at least the autofocus wasn't getting left behind. I would be more concerned if the autofocus was really lagging back a ways and not able to keep up. So we'll look at another series here. And so here, obviously, the dog is very nicely in focus and has caught up to the ball and kind of lost it. But we can see that in that sequence, the the tracking is held up nicely there. Now, just to give you an idea of how the Canon 100-400L Mark II does in a similar situation, here we'll see that it does quite an excellent job in this kind of application of tracking, and it's I think it's one of Canon's best in terms of the autofocus. Not to say that it's perfect. As you can see, the action moved a little bit ahead of the dog, and in this case, focus wasn't perfect, although you can see that even after it lost, it picked back up again, which is always impressive to me. And also impressive is that it's locking on even when you're getting quite close. And at 400 millimeters, that's a challenge, obviously. But, we can see here, just another series here, it probably switched over to the ball. And so as a result, the dog is out of focus. Ball is moved out of frame, and so it's shifting over to the dog. But, again, it's not perfect. And here we can see focus is actually behind. What's in focus is the spray behind the dog. And here, obviously, it hasn't caught up. And so while I felt, and this is just a few of the many such series that I shot, and so what I found is that both the Canon and the Tamron can be guilty of, losing focus sometimes, but they actually both track remarkably well. I do think that the Canon still has a bit of an edge in terms of keepers, but my biggest takeaway is that the Tamron was keeping up with this kind of action, which is a far cry from what I saw when I did a similar type test with the Sigma 100-400 contemporary lens. So I'm encouraged by that. Now, if you move to a different kind of venue here, what I've done here is I shot a number of series of my son, who is running competitively right now, of him running towards the camera. So obviously occupying a bigger target, higher contrast, easier to keep up with. However, I purposely shot on a road where there's a lot of stuff going on. So we're going to see as we move through this series, I had him running, just sprinting towards me. And what I found is that despite the fact that there is a lot of stuff going on here, and I was just bursting as quickly as what the Canon 5D Mark IV could do, we could see that despite, some movement in the frame, other things that could, grab attention, we can see that it has actually done a remarkably good job of tracking focus accurately throughout this. And so if you're dealing with a little less challenging object and maybe just slightly less speed than the small dog moving at speed, it's actually done a really remarkable job. And this was true of all the series that I shot, and I won't bore you with all of those here, but I thought I'd take you all the way through one. And there's just one shot here that I remember towards the end where autofocus wasn't right. And out of that, though, like 40-something different frames, autofocus was keeping right up. There it is right there. For whatever reason, autofocus seems to have moved too far ahead. But next frame, it's right back on there. And so we can see, maybe starting to lose it. Here it's perfect. Starting to lose it here. Focus goes out here. But even though he's starting to get close to the camera, it picked it right back up. And so that was great to see there. And so, all in all, a pretty strong performance in terms of the focus, speed, and accuracy with the lens. So as you can see, the report here is a lot more positive, at least with this copy that I've reviewed. And so I've now shot it on both full frame and APS-C bodies. And afterward, I did do a very, very minor calibration on the wide end, but bottom line is the 400mm telephoto in was pretty much bang on out of the box, and I needed like a +1 or 2 on the wide end to have that nailed down as well. So a really positive autofocus accuracy report. But beyond that, as you could see, a surprisingly strong performance when it came to the tracking. And while I still think that the Canon is the best of the bunch, it helps having that little extra bit of light transmission, and of course the first party autofocus system, and it has one of Canon's best. But frankly, the Tamron seemed to be every bit as fast in my just kind of focus test, and it was able to keep up with action nearly as good. And depending on what kind of action you're doing, it can nail it pretty much perfectly, as we saw. And so a lot of encouraging things there. And so while I'll come back to you with my final verdict, and I'll have a kind of a shorter segment that just kind of gives you an overview of all of these things, also a look at the VC performance. But, I'm feeling pretty positive about this lens, that it's a lot of bang for the buck. And so stay tuned for my final verdict coming in a few days, along with my written review. I'm Dustin Abbott. Take a look in the image gallery below, or excuse me, in the description down below, and you can find a linkage to the image gallery, some pre-order links there, all of those things. And of course, stay tuned for my final verdict. If you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.